Lifelong domain adaptation via consolidated internal distribution. What is lifelong domain adaptation? It's an attempt to combine unsupervised domain adaptation UDA and continuous learning CL in a generalizable manner through training on unannotated datasets. This is because using labeled data limits generalization. The goal is to learn adaptively when the underlying distribution of the inputs can drift with time. So the distributions are not fully distinct, they are similar, but they can shift with time. What is a consolidated internal distribution? It is the mapping of target training data in a latent embedding space. So the source and target distributions are aligned in that embedding space. And this is done in this problem through a Weisstein distance, a sliced Weisstein distance. The logic behind this is that if you train a model on the source distribution, which is aligned with the target distribution in the embedding space, then it should generalize. This is already done in UD algorithms, but there's a caveat which we will mention later. So, what are some key problems to solve? Problems with UDA. Underlying model can be trained if both datasets are accessible. Usually, UDA is for single source and single target pairs. Clearly, this defeats the purpose of a lifetime domain adaptation problem. Updating parameters according to the new distribution is insufficient because even though we may get good results on that new distribution, catastrophic forgetting may imply that we get a deteriorating performance on the older distributions. Then there are problems with continuous learning. First, it has been used mainly in supervised settings so far, and it has not properly been generalized to other domains than image translation. Now, looking at our problem statement, the source domain S has a labeled training dataset called DS with X0 and Y0. These data points are from an unknown source distribution. The unlabeled datasets are dt of t. These are the target domains for every time step. There is an unknown distribution for the target domains as well. And we will say that the model comprises an encoder 5v that transforms the input into embeddings, like we discussed the embedding space, and a classifier subnetwork HW. So now the caveat, although this has been used in UD algorithms before, phi of P0 X0, that is the embedding of the source distribution, cannot be computed in this case. This is our proposed solution. So first, a few important things. The encoder maps the input source data into a multimodal distribution, and each mode represents a class. A memory buffer is something that stores the subsets of most representative samples. So small subsets of most representative samples are stored to be used later. What if there is an absence of source data? In that case, we generate a pseudo dataset by drawing samples from the Gaussian mixture model, and the labels are picked from the predictions of the model when the probability is greater than a particular threshold. Okay, so now the proposed solution. 1. New target domains are encountered sequentially, as we can see. 2. This data set and the representative samples from the memory buffer are both encoded. The representative samples from the previous distribution are used to prevent forgetting. In this embedding space, there is a consolidated internal distribution CID, as we can see. Third, the model is trained jointly on the input and memory buffer samples. Fourth, the supervised pathway remains stable via continual training on the pseudo dataset. Fifth, the Gaussian mixture model is updated upon learning the current tasks. And sixth, data is selected from the CID so that it can be stored in the memory buffer for pseudo rehearsal. What is pseudo rehearsal? The generation of samples that should follow the distribution of the representative samples. So it is synthetically generated basically. And the algorithm that we get as a result of this proposed solution is called the LDACID algorithm. Now looking at our loss function. So these are the expressions for our source domain data in the Gaussian mixture model. Then this is our loss function to be minimized, and we see that it has 4 components. So this would make sure the classifier preserves its generalizability on the internal distribution, the first loss term. The second loss term is that the classifier generalizes for the buffer dataset also. And the last 2 terms are to minimize the distance between the target domain distribution and 1, the internal distribution, and 2, the buffer dataset. And all of this is happening in the embedding space for the distances. So now looking at our results. So initially the performance drops on the target domain, and this is true for all 8 tasks. This is because of the domain shift, but we see that the learning curves for subsequent tasks initialize significantly higher, and this signifies that past knowledge is being transferred. We see that catastrophic forgetting has been mitigated. Final performance is low if domain gap between the domains are larger for the dataset, which we can see in the case of the third column here, the office home dataset, where the domain gaps were larger and this model performs poorly. In case of large forgetting effects, it means that we can use a larger number of samples in the memory buffer, which could help. Looking at some comparisons. So for the first one, we see that ETD and ELDA UCID perform very similar. That's because ELDA, UCID and ETD have similar distance metrics. Next, we have very good classification accuracy for table 2. That is because it's a very balanced data set, so it reduces bias and it's closer to a real distribution. Now we're looking at table 3, the office home data set, where we see that ELDA UCID has not performed very well, but neither have the other ones. But CDAN has. So that's because it focuses on the class conditional probabilities. And then we have table 4, where once again the model has performed really very well. Thank you.